Hey, welcome back to Nocturne Library. Or welcome in if you're new. I'm Ava Calloway, and I'm really glad you're here tonight. And thank you for making Nocturne Library part of your nightly routine, for letting this be one of the places you come to soften the edges of the day and drift off. Tonight's sleep story takes us to a Tuscan vineyard patio at dusk, where the evening settles in slowly and a gentle wine flight arrives, one glass at a time. It's written by Nora Fielding, and it has that beautifully quiet, sensory kind of atmosphere that's easy to sink into if your mind's been busy today, or you've just had a long one. You're in exactly the right place. This one is all warm stone and cooling air. The feel of wrought iron under your hand. The clink of stemware. Bread torn open and dipped in olive oil. And that soft, faraway murmur of cafes somewhere down the hill. Nothing urgent, nothing sharp. Just a calm, lingering evening in the Chianti countryside, with plenty of space to breathe. And if you'd like to support the channel, a like or subscribe always helps these stories keep coming. So let your shoulders drop, unclench your jaw, and take one slow, easy breath in and out. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. Settling into the wrought iron chair on the Chianti Terrace. The seat is still warm when you lower yourself into it. 3 modest pours somewhere behind you in the building. Cooling air already moving down the hillside. The cypress line at the vineyard's edge darkening by degrees before the first glass ever reaches the table. That stored warmth rises through the thin fabric at the backs of your legs, through your hips, through the small of your back, as the dark green iron takes your weight with one familiar creak. One hand finds the chestnut table before you look anywhere at all, and your fingertips meet its ridged grain. The shallow, pale rings left by old glasses. The dry, steady texture of wood that has spent many evenings under open air. A light shawl rests across your shoulders. Under your sandals, the terrace stones are still giving back the day. You know what the evening will bring. 3 modest pours that will come later on an olive wood board. The cypress line at the vineyard's edge darkening by degrees. The first chilled Vernaccia cooling your fingers when it arrives. And beyond all of it, the hills settling toward the hour when crickets replace the birds. Nothing in that sequence asks for effort. You let yourself settle more completely into the chair. The looping backrest meets you between the shoulder blades. Curved iron pressing through the shawl with a firmness that is almost companionable in its plainness. The chair is not soft, and that is part of its comfort. It gives you clear edges, seat beneath you, back at your spine, stone underfoot, table underhand. The chair, table, and stone give your body clear points of contact. The air still carries the warmth of late day, though it is no longer the broad heat of afternoon. It has thinned. On your forearms, there is the first suggestion of coolness moving in among the warmer layers. And because of that, You draw the shawl a little closer without much thought, one side crossing more snugly over your chest, the cloth brushing your neck with a faint, dry rustle. The movement is small, but you feel the difference at once. Your chin lifts slightly from the touch of cool air at the throat, then eases back. The shoulders settle lower. Your breath leaves a little more slowly. Only then do you begin to take in what surrounds you. The terrace runs along the hillside in stone and terracotta, open toward the descending rows of vines. Near the low wall, large clay pots hold rosemary and lavender, their leaves silvered at the edges by the last slant of sun. Even before you lean nearer, their scent drifts up in the warm air. Rosemary resinous and green, lavender dusty and cool, both warmed all day by the stones, and now releasing themselves more slowly. The pots stand where they always stand, steady and sunbaked, and the clay has that matte, weathered surface that turns richer as the light lowers. Beyond them, the vineyard begins in ordered lines, each row still visible for now, though the spaces between them have already started to fill with blue shadow. Farther out, where the slope carries your eye toward the edge of the property, the cypresses rise in a long, dark seam against the hills. At this hour, they are still green if you look directly, but only just. In another little while, they will become shape more than color. Low voices carry across the terrace. A few drift from nearby tables, some in Italian, some in English, none distinct enough to follow. A laugh lifts from somewhere behind you and is gone almost at once. A glass touches wood. A chair leg shifts lightly over stone. The sounds do not gather into conversation for you. They stay broken apart, softened by open air. Part of the patio hush that belongs to places where people have already eaten a little, drunk a little, and stopped trying to fill every pause. Your hand remains on the table. The chestnut top is weathered in a way that invites touch rather than admiration. It is not polished smooth. The grain stands up in faint ridges, enough that the pads of your fingers can travel over them and feel direction, rise and fall. A tiny map under the skin. Here and there, old rings left by wet glasses have lightened the wood to a pale, ghostly brown. Circles half overlapping one another from other evenings. Other hands resting where yours rests now. Near the edge, one shallow nick catches your nail. You return to it once, then again. Not because it matters, but because your finger returns to the nick because it's easy to find. A breeze reaches the terrace from the vines. It does not arrive as a gust. It touches the side of your face, slips under the edge of the shawl at the collarbone, cools the knuckles resting on the table, and continues on. The rosemary nearest you stirs, releasing a sharper thread of scent. Somewhere lower on the slope, a few leaves turn against one another with a sound so slight you could miss it if you were listening for something larger. You are not listening for anything larger. The sky above the hills is still bright enough to hold color in layers, near the west, where the sun has dropped out of sight, there is a band of faded gold thinning into apricot, then into a clearer, higher blue. The light that remains on the terrace is no longer direct. It touches the stone from the side, catching the worn edges and shallow irregularities where years of footsteps have polished some places smoother than others. If you glance down, you can see the difference between stones that held more sun and stones that fell earlier into shade. One is warm through the soul. One is cooler. You feel the difference before you look down. You shift once in the chair, a small adjustment that lets your back fit more neatly against the iron loops. The chair answers with another tiny creak, not sharp, not intrusive. It is the kind of sound that becomes familiar in a place after only a short while. And you can already tell that before the evening is over, you will know it, as well as the feel of the table under your hand. At the next table, a glass touches wood with a muted note. The sound is round and brief. There is no reason to turn toward it. It enters the air and then blends with the rest. Voices lowering, a spoon touching porcelain, the easy scrape of a chair being tucked in closer. Nothing gathers momentum. Everything arrives in its own time and then recedes. The shawl slips a little as you tilt your head, and you lift one hand to draw it back into place. The fabric brushes the side of your neck, then settles more closely over your shoulders. You notice, as you smooth it down, that the skin there has cooled more than you realized. The day has not gone far, but it has begun to leave your body by degrees, starting at the places most open to the air: forearms, throat, the tops of your hands. The warmth in the chair answers from below. Between the two temperatures, you find a pleasant balance, not one to solve or correct, only to notice. For a moment, your gaze follows the line of the terrace wall outward again. The vines descend in patient order, each row narrowing with distance until they become less individual than patterned. Beyond them, the farm roads are no longer busy. If a car passes at all, it is too far away to claim much attention. Only a suggestion of movement somewhere among the folds of land. Terrace nearest, vineyard below, hills beyond, sky above, stone cooling, herbs giving off the last of their heat, birds somewhere farther off making their final practical calls before they disappear into whatever branch or eave they choose each evening. One bird cuts across the open sky for a second, dark against the lighter band near the horizon, then vanishes beyond the Cypress line. You watch it only long enough to know it is gone. Your palm flattens on the table, and the wood meets it with a faint, retained warmth. That warmth is different from the chairs. The iron keeps heat in a denser way, concentrated and direct, pressing upward through fabric into muscle. The chestnut gives it back more lightly, from the surface only, where the sun touched it earlier, and the ridges interrupt that warmth with their dry little rises under your skin, under your hand. Warmth and texture combine into something grounding enough that your breath changes around it. You had not noticed your breathing until now. It has already slowed. Somewhere inside the building behind you, a door opens and closes. Not loudly. A brief change in the air. A softened footstep. Then stillness again. Service continues in the background of the terrace. In the same measured way, everything else continues. But for now, nothing has yet been placed before you. The table remains mostly bare under your hand. Open space, waiting for the later arrival of glass and board. And now that future arrival has begun to draw nearer. First, this settling. First, this becoming aware of the place through touch. First, this part where the body understands, before the mind does, that it can settle. You lean back a little more. The shawl gathers at your elbows. The iron backrest presses more evenly along your spine. Your feet rest side by side on the stone, no longer angled as if preparing to stand again. It occurs to you, not as an instruction, but as a quiet fact, that you have already arrived enough to stop adjusting. Another breeze passes over the hillside and into the terrace, cooler than the last. The cloth at your shoulders shifts. Lavender and rosemary rise again from the terracotta pots, mingling with the mineral scent of stone that has spent all day in sun. You draw the shawl closer and rest your hand on the table, ready for the first glass. Chapter 2. Resting your hands on the chestnut table as dusk softens. Your hand returns to the chestnut wood and stays there. For a while, that is enough to notice. The empty center of the table begins to feel ready. Somewhere nearby, ceramic touches wood with a muted, careful clink. Service is moving among the tables. Not toward you in any hurry, but nearer than before. The table has been in weather for years, and your fingertips can tell. The grain rises in faint ridges, not sharp, only present. Here and there, the wood dips almost imperceptibly where many wrists have rested, many glasses have stood, many evenings have passed here. Pale rings remain from old condensation, some complete, some broken. A soft map of circles that overlap and fade into the chestnut's warm brown. You let one finger follow the edge of a ring and then drift off it again, while the open space beyond your hand seems to hold itself ready. The chair beneath you gives its familiar support without asking for attention. The looping iron at your back is firm through the shawl, and the seat still carries a little of the day, though not as much as when you first sat down. Beneath your sandals, the terrace stones continue to release heat in a slower way now, less from the surface than from somewhere inside them. If you shift your feet a fraction, you can feel the difference between one stone and the next. One still sun-warm, another already turning cool where shade reached it sooner. The air has cooled enough that you feel it in your shoulders. The shawl rests there with a little more weight than before. Not heavier in itself, just more noticeable against your neck and upper arms, where the skin has begun to register evening instead of afternoon. You draw your thumb once along the table's edge, feeling a rounded place where many hands have done the same. And then leave your palm open on the wood. Around you, the terrace continues in low fragments. A woman somewhere to your left finishes a sentence in Italian and lets the last word lengthen into a small laugh. From farther back, nearer the wall, a man answers someone in English, his voice worn down by distance until only the cadence reaches you. The sounds do not gather into conversation you need to follow. They arrive as pieces and pass as pieces. A brief murmur, a chair leg moved carefully over stone, the short, bright note of a spoon touching ceramic, and then stopping. Nothing rises enough to disturb the shape of the evening. The patio keeps its cafe hush, not silent, only settled into a shared understanding that voices belong low here. When you first came to the table, the rosemary and lavender from the terracotta pots along the terrace edge met you in passing, mixed with warm stone and the dry green breath of the vineyard below. Now the rosemary comes forward first, resinous and almost peppered, especially when the air shifts from that side. The lavender follows more slowly, less floral than herbal at this hour, softened by the day's heat that still clings to the clay. You do not need to look down constantly. The table can be known through the hand alone. Still, when your eyes lower, the wood has darkened as the light fades. The pale marks stand out more clearly now than they did in the late gold. A tiny, splintered place near the far corner catches a line of brightness and then lets it go. The edge of the table throws a narrowing shadow across your lap. When the host comes into view, he is already only 2 tables away. You glance up without lifting your head much. He is crossing the patio with a folded cloth over one forearm and balancing a small plate in the other hand. He moves the way he has moved all evening, with that measured economy that keeps glasses upright and the atmosphere unchanged. At one table he bends, places something down, waits the span of a breath for it to settle, then straightens and steps back. No flourish, no interruption. The guests barely shift except to make room for his hand. Watching him makes it easier to stay still. The tasting board has not arrived. The 3 modest pours that were promised remain part of the near future. Close enough now to make the empty table feel near to use. Not close enough to alter the pace of your breathing. The host's care seems designed to preserve exactly that. Not to break the quiet, only to enter it briefly and leave it intact. A breeze moves through the terrace and changes the scents again. This time, lavender lifts first, then the sharper green of rosemary, and beneath both comes the faint mineral note from the stone floor. Cooling after a whole day of sun, the air touches the back of your wrist where it lies on the table. And for 1 second, the skin there feels cooler than the rest of you. Then the sensation passes. Beyond the terrace, the hillside is less bright than it was when you sat down, though you do not need to turn fully to know it. The change reaches you through reflection first. The tabletop no longer carries the same warm cast of late day. Instead, it holds a flatter, dimmer light. The pots of rosemary and lavender at the edge have lost some of their terracotta blaze and gone earthier, more brown than orange now. The vineyard below has become less a pattern of rose than a broadening field of blue-green shade. The low talk around you thins and thickens in turns. A pair of voices nearer the entrance grows briefly clearer when someone pushes back a chair, then softens again. A little farther off, cutlery touches a plate with 2 restrained taps. Someone says grazie in a tone worn smooth by repetition. The host answers too low for the words to carry. You hear only the cadence, the downward finish that leaves the exchange complete. Your thumb finds another old mark in the wood. This one is not a ring, but a shallow nick, the sort left by a knife set down without thought years ago, or by a plate with a rough underside dragged an inch too far. The chestnut has darkened inside the cut. You press the pad of your thumb into it and feel how little depth it has. You sit a touch farther back in the chair, and the iron gives a faint creak. It is the same small sound as before, already familiar enough to disappear almost as soon as it happens. The backrest meets your shoulder blades through the shawl. One corner has slipped toward your elbow, and you gather it in with a brief motion, the fabric making a dry, brushed sound as it slides over itself. Then stillness returns. From the terrace edge comes the smell of crushed herb for an instant, as if someone passing a pot has brushed rosemary with a sleeve. Down in the vineyard, a final bird call reaches up and then is gone, not replaced yet by crickets, only by the broadening hush that comes before they begin in earnest. The farm roads beyond the vines have quieted. No engine, no gate, no distant machinery. Your hand shifts again, not because it needs to, but because the grain offers another path. You follow it toward the center of the table where the boards meet. The seam is nearly level, though one side sits a fraction higher than the other. Your nail catches there and then glides on. A small crumb, perhaps from bread served earlier, brushes against your fingertip and sticks for a moment before you lift it away. This is not polished perfection. It is a table used often and wiped clean many times, preserving traces only where use has pressed them in. At the next table, a glass is set down with care. Not enough to ring, only a muted contact and the slight whisper of a bass moving half an inch over wood. Then again, the host's rhythm. Place, pause, withdraw. The pace of service keeps the terrace calm. The terrace does not need to widen just now. It is enough to remain with what is near. The chestnut under your hand, faintly cool. The shawl settled at your shoulders. The iron chair supporting your back. The herb-scented air moving and then resting again. Around these, the low human sounds continue, worn smooth by distance. Beyond them, the hillside dims another shade. The table holds your attention, even while the empty place before you gathers purpose. so you leave your fingers there. You feel the rounded edge beneath your thumb and the faint old marks under your palm. You listen to the terrace breathe through conversation, ceramic, cloth, and the occasional step across stone. Each small sound seeming now to come from a little closer. And dusk goes on softening over the hills, just as the service nears. Chapter 3. The first pour of Vernaccia on the olive wood tasting board. And dusk goes on softening over the hills, while you remain exactly where you are. After a little while, the table in front of you stops feeling like a place to rest your hand and becomes a place where something will arrive. Your fingertips rest on the chestnut grain. The pale rings left by old glasses show faintly in the wood. Around you, the patio keeps its low murmur. A few words in Italian drift from one table, then a reply in English from another, both too softened by distance to mean anything in particular. Beyond the terrace stones and terracotta pots, the vineyard has begun to lose the sharper edges it held in late afternoon. Rosemary and lavender release their dry green scent where the warmth remains trapped in the clay and stone. The host appears between the tables, not suddenly. You simply become aware of a figure moving through the tables with the practiced evenness of someone who knows how little motion is needed. A hand carries a narrow board of olive wood, long enough for 3 glasses and nothing more. The board catches what remains of the light in its grain, that pale, honeyed brown, crossed by darker swirls and knots, polished. The glasses upon it are modest and properly stemmed, each one set with deliberate space between the others, so that the arrangement feels measured without becoming formal. You find yourself straightening only slightly, not from alertness exactly, but from the body's natural answer to being served. The wrought-iron chair gives the smallest creak as your weight shifts. One hand leaves the table and settles in your lap beneath the edge of the shawl. The other remains where it is, as if to keep contact with the wood while the new object enters your small circle of attention. The host reaches the table and sets the board on the chestnut surface. A faint sound comes from it, a muted double note as the board settles, and the stems answer with the slightest tremor. The 3 pours barely move, only a thin, shifting line at each surface. Then the hand lifts away, and the host steps back with the same economy of movement, leaving the board in front of you, as though it has always belonged there. You look at the 3 glasses without needing to decide anything yet. Their spacing is simple, almost spare. The first pour is the palest, a clear straw color with a faint green cast near the stem where the light passes through. The second and third wait farther along the board, deeper in tone. But your attention settles naturally on the first, chilled enough that the bowl is dotted with tiny beads of condensation. It seems to carry a separate temperature from the evening around it. For a moment, that is enough to look. The olive wood beneath the glasses has its own character, more fluid in its grain than the chestnut table below. You can see where the board narrows slightly toward one end, where the maker followed the shape of the wood instead of forcing it into exact symmetry. It rests across the old pale rings on the table, as if this newer object has entered into an older pattern of use. The board does not cover the ridges in the chestnut entirely. Near your wrist, you still feel the table's familiar texture, while just beyond your hand, the smoother olive wood offers a different kind of steadiness. You let your gaze return to the first glass. It's Vernaccia. The bowl is cool enough that the condensation has gathered in clear pinpoints rather than running yet. One bead swells near the lower curve, catches the last gold from the hills, and slowly begins to descend. It leaves a narrow track behind it, then disappears against your fingers when you reach for the stem. The contact is immediate and precise. Your fingertips meet the stem first, cool and slender, and then the base settles lightly against the pad of your thumb. The glass is colder than the air, colder than the table, colder than the warmth still stored in the chair beneath you. The chill is immediate. You feel the contrast all the more because your skin has already adjusted to stone, cloth, iron, and dusk. You lift the glass a little, not yet to drink, only to feel its weight. It is less than you expect, perhaps because the pour is modest, perhaps because the stemmed shape distributes the weight so evenly. The condensation touches the side of your forefinger where it strays from the stem to the bowl, and the chill there is almost startling in its neatness. Not sharp enough to pull you out of yourself, only clear enough to gather your attention into one place. The terrace, the murmur of other tables, the darkening vineyard remain around you, but they recede a little while your hand learns the temperature of the glass. You bring it nearer. Before the first sip, there is the faint scent rising from the bowl. Not large, not complicated, just a clean brightness that reaches you before words do. Citrus, yes, but not sweet citrus. More the pale inner edge of lemon peel, the coolness of something just cut. And beneath that, a stony, saline note. You breathe it in without trying to analyze it further. It is enough that it arrives lightly and leaves the mind less crowded than it found it. The rim touches your lower lip. The first sip is small. The wine enters the mouth with a chill that gathers along the tongue and the inner curve of the cheeks. And then the flavor opens in a way that is both brisk and measured. Brightness first, a saline lift after it, very slight, but enough to keep the citrus from becoming simple. Then, a softer shape begins to appear as you hold it there for a moment before swallowing. Something rounder beneath the initial clarity, as if the wine has more ease in it than its first cool touch suggested. You swallow, and the aftertaste remains clean and faintly savory. For a few seconds, you do nothing else. Your hand still holds the glass just above the board. Your shoulders rest into the chair again. The shawl has slipped no farther. It stays where you drew it earlier, brushing the sides of your neck. The evening air moves across the back of your hand where the glass has left a trace of cool moisture. For a moment, all you notice is the glass and the taste it leaves. A little farther off, someone laughs once, low and brief, and then returns to conversation. Another ceramic dish is set down somewhere behind you with a dull, rounded clink. The sounds do not pull at you. They pass across the surface of the evening and settle into it. The host moves away toward another table, nearly out of notice now, carrying nothing, hands free, pace unchanged. You lower the glass carefully to the board. Again, there is that tiny answering sound, stem to wood, almost too slight to call a clink. The base leaves a faint ring of moisture beginning to form on the olive wood, a newer mark beside the older weathering of the table beneath. The other two can wait. Your fingers stay on the stem a moment longer, even after the base has settled. Then they release it and return to the chestnut table, where the ridged grain meets the pads of your fingers, like something known well enough that you no longer have to think about it. The contrast between the cool glass and the warm wood still lingers in your skin. You can feel where the chill touched you, a narrow path across finger and thumb. When you lift the glass again, the movement feels already more familiar. This time, the scent rises a little more readily, perhaps because the wine has warmed by a degree in the air, perhaps because your own attention has learned how to meet it. The citrus note is still there, but softer now, no longer leading so much as accompanying. You take another small sip and notice more clearly the way the brightness settles rather than vanishes, how the saline edge gives structure and then yields to a gentler finish. The small pour invites slow drinking. You rest back, the looping iron of the chair firm between your shoulders. The warmth stored in the seat is less than it was when you first sat down, but still present, especially through the lighter fabric at the backs of your thighs. One foot shifts against the terrace stone, and the sole of your sandal finds a patch that has kept the day's heat better than the rest. The body notices these things on its own. The cool stem, the warmer chair, the shawl's brushed weave against the forearm, the chestnut edge rounded by many hands before yours. On the board, the condensation has begun to gather more fully on the bowl of the Vernaccia. A second bead joins the first path and curves downward. In the slanting light, the wine itself looks paler at the rim and deeper toward the center, where the bowl thickens the color. You study it for a moment with the same unforced attention you might give to the grain in old wood or the shape of a leaf against stone. There is no need to search it for anything hidden. Looking is enough. Beyond the table, the cypress line at the vineyard's edge has darkened another shade. The hills still carry a little gold, but less of it now, and what remains sits lower, as if drawn closer to the contours of the land. A bird crosses that brightness quickly, one dark shape moving through the last lit air, and then it is gone beyond the terrace wall. The patio murmur continues, softer by degrees as evening settles further in. You take a third sip, smaller than the others, and let it rest on your tongue a moment longer. The wine has already changed slightly from the first taste, not in character, but in the way it meets you. Less chilled now at the rim, more open across the palate. The citrus has widened into something gentler. The mineral note remains, and with it, that faint, saline touch that keeps everything clear. It leaves your mouth refreshed rather than filled, making space instead of taking it. The wine suits the hour. You set the glass down once more and watch the board settle into stillness again. 3 modest pours. 1 already partly received. 2 remaining farther along the olive wood. Not for now. Not yet. The host's ritual has passed through your table and moved on, leaving almost no trace except the board, the glasses, and the cool dampness on your fingertips. So you stay with that first glass a little longer, with the chestnut grain under one hand and the stem under the other, with the shawl resting higher on your shoulders than it did before, with the air just beginning to cool along the open skin of your wrist. The evening has shifted by 1 small degree. The tasting has begun, and on the terrace above the darkening rose, that is enough. Chapter 4. Sipping chilled Vernaccia in the last golden light. You keep your hand around the stem a moment before lifting it. The bowl is cool above your fingers, beaded with a fine skin of condensation that catches against your thumb when you turn it slightly. Beneath your other hand, the chestnut table stays steady and familiar, its grain faintly raised, its old pale rings half visible in the lowering light. The board rests between your forearms, with its 3 modest pours, spaced in an order that needs no explanation. For now, your attention stays with the first. When you lift the glass, the chair gives the smallest answer beneath you, that familiar iron creak, then stills again. The warmth left in the seat from the late sun has thinned, but not disappeared. It remains under your hips and along the backs of your thighs, while the air above the table has begun to cool enough that the shawl matters more than it did a little while ago. You feel its edge against the side of your neck when you tilt your head. You bring the glass nearer first, without drinking. The scent is not heavy enough to arrive all at once. It comes in a narrow line, bright, lightly saline. You notice how different that brightness feels from the day behind it. The evening has warmth still, but the wine does not try to match it. It offers its own temperature, its own clean edge, then the first sip. The chill reaches the front of your mouth first, almost before flavor does. And then the flavor opens in the same place. Lemon peel, a pale mineral note, something that leans toward sea salt without becoming it. The lift is immediate. Not sharp exactly, not insistent, but clear enough that your shoulders drop a little. Your tongue follows the line of it. The wine moves cool across the palate. And then, after that first bright rise begins to round itself, the citrus eases. the mineral note remains. What seemed at first brisk starts to soften as it warms in the mouth. You let the sip finish slowly. Even after you swallow, the coolness remains for a breath or two, then gives way to a gentler trace that sits farther back, less vivid and more settled. You notice how it softens after the first bright hit. You lower the glass without haste and set it back on the olive wood. The base touches down with a small, neat sound. A fresh ring of moisture begins to gather where it stands. Beyond the rim of the terrace, the hills are still carrying the last gold of the day, but lower now, thinner. The light no longer spreads evenly across the vineyard rows. It catches one slope and leaves another already turning blue. Along the edge of the property, the cypress line has begun to lose detail. Earlier, you could see the separate textures of the foliage, the slight irregularity from tree to tree. Now, they are becoming a continuous, dark edge, deep green drawing toward black. Their tall forms simpler against the sky. You rest back and look without trying to follow anything in particular. The vineyard rows below the terrace have softened too. Their order remains, but the sharpness has gone out of the leaves. The day's heat is leaving them by degrees. Somewhere beyond the visible slope, a farm road that carried the occasional motor earlier has gone quiet. The pause that follows is not complete silence. It is made of smaller sounds. A low exchange from another table. One brief laugh quickly gone. A glass touched to wood. The dry brush of a sleeve over stone. Farther out, the birds are fewer now than they were an hour ago. Their calls come singly, with more space between them. You lift the glass again, this time already knowing something of what it will do. The stem is slicker now from the condensation that has begun to run in a thin line down the bowl. Your fingers adjust without needing to think about it, finding the narrow place where cool glass meets dry skin. Another sip, a little smaller than the first. Again, the brightness arrives first. But because you are no longer surprised by it, you notice more. There is a clean bitterness at the edge of the citrus, like pith rather than juice. And beneath that, a stony clarity that keeps the wine from feeling merely cold. You hold it a moment longer before swallowing. As it warms, the saline note broadens, and the whole shape of the sip becomes less vertical, less lifted, more even across the tongue. It is still lively, but not in a way that stirs you up. It clears a space and then settles into it. The last of the sun reaches the terrace, at an angle now, not enough to warm your face, only enough to turn the bowl of the glass pale gold where it catches. The condensation shines briefly there, then dims when you move it. On the table, the chestnut grain shows more plainly where the light skims across the ridges. Your fingertips drift over one of the old rings beside your plate setting and feel the slight roughness where years of glasses have left their marks. A bird crosses the light over the far slope so quickly that you almost miss it. A swallow, perhaps, or a blackbird returning low across the vineyard edge. It passes through the gold where the hill still catches the sun, and then disappears into the darkening side beyond, leaving no trace except that brief cut of motion. Afterward, the scene seems slower, though nothing has actually changed, except your noticing of it. You take another sip. By now, the wine has shifted slightly in the glass. Not warmer exactly, but less cold than when it first arrived. The chill no longer leads quite so strongly. The citrus opens more readily, and the saline edge feels integrated with it, rather than separate. The same is true of the skin at your forearms, which no longer reads the air as an interruption, but simply as the new temperature of the hour. From the terracotta pots along the terrace, rosemary rises when the breeze reaches it. Not continuously, only in passing. Lavender follows more faintly, dry and clean. The scents do not overtake the wine. They move beside it, then thin again. You become aware of the stone under your sandals, releasing less heat than before. Not gone yet, only reduced. If you slide 1 foot a little, the sole catches a warmer patch, and then a cooler one where shadow has settled longer. The conversation from the nearest table drifts over in fragments, Italian turning to English and back again. The tone's low enough that the words matter less than the cadence. Someone sets down a fork. Someone else answers with a murmur. The patio keeps its cafe hush, but the spaces between sounds have grown wider. Out in the vineyard, the leaves stir once and then stop. The first crickets have not fully taken over yet. You can feel that threshold approaching in the way the birds recede, one by one, and leave room behind them. You rest the glass against your lower lip before drinking again, enjoying the cool contact there. Then another sip, unhurried, enough to wet the mouth and carry that narrow line of brightness across the tongue once more. This time you notice how the wine seems to gather itself at the sides of the palate after the swallow, then taper away. It leaves no heaviness. It leaves a clean shape, a trace of citrus and mineral that fades in an orderly way. The gold on the hills lowers further. What had been warm light on the upper vines is now only a band across one shoulder of land, with the rest already in blue shadow. The cypress line stands firmer by contrast, almost ink dark at the base where the slope drops away. Above it, the sky still holds color, but less of the bright day blue than before. It has begun to mute toward evening, and the wine in your hand seems to belong exactly to this part of the descent. It suits the hour between heat and night. Your shoulders settle more fully against the looping iron backrest. The shawl slips a little at one side, and you draw it back over your shoulder with the hand that is not holding the glass, feeling the cloth slide across the upper arm and catch lightly at the collarbone before it falls into place. That small adjustment changes the whole upper body by a degree. The neck loosens. The chest broadens on the next inhale. You stay there for a moment, with the glass raised but untouched, noticing how much comfort can come from one edge of fabric lying where it should. When you drink again, the wine is familiar. The first surprise has passed. What remains is the pleasure of repetition with slight variation. Cooler at the stem than at the bowl. Brighter at the front than at the finish. More saline when taken in a smaller sip. More citrus when allowed to spread. You do not need to name each part every time. It is enough to feel the pattern and let it repeat. A little farther down the terrace, someone laughs once, softly, and then the sound folds back into the general murmur. No one raises a voice. The host moves somewhere behind you with the same measured tread as before. Not near enough to interrupt, only present as part of the terrace's rhythm. A plate lifted, a glass set down, a pause, then footsteps receding over stone. The board before you remains undisturbed, except for the diminishing level in the first glass and the faint, damp ring beneath it. You turn the stem between your fingers and watch the pale wine catch the last usable light. It glows less now than it did a few minutes ago. The color has become subtler, straw moving towards silver as the sun withdraws. You think, not in words exactly, that this first pour belongs to the edge of day in the same way the second will belong to evening proper. This one still carries brightness, but already it is softening. The next sip is the smallest yet. It barely cools the mouth before disappearing. And because of that, it seems especially clear. A thread of citrus, a touch of salt, stone, then less and less. You set the glass down and leave your fingertips on the stem for a while after, feeling the chill diminish where your skin meets it. Out beyond the terrace wall, the vineyard has almost fully entered shadow. Only the highest rise still keeps a little gold, and even that has thinned to a narrow strip. The cypresses are nearly silhouette now. One bird calls once from somewhere lower on the slope, then not again. In the pause after it, the hillside holds for a moment in that thin hush before the insects begin in earnest. You breathe in through your nose and catch the wine's fading brightness from the rim, rosemary from the pots, the dry mineral scent of warm stone cooling at last. The terrace remains beneath all of it. Chestnut under your hand, iron at your back, shawl at your shoulders. The olive board before you, with its waiting second and third pours, still untouched. But for now, you stay with the first glass and the last gold on the hills, each one easing toward its softer form as the evening goes on. Chapter 5. Watching the vineyard rose fade into blue evening shadow. You let the first glass rest again on the olive board, its bowl still faintly cool from the chill it carried a few moments ago. And only when your fingers leave the stem does something in you ease outward. Your hand returns to the table. The wood is ridged under your fingertips, worn smooth at the edges and rougher in the grain between. with old pale rings pressed into it by evenings much like this one. The fresh ring beneath the Vernaccia has begun to gather and spread in a thin, damp circle, darker than the wood around it for now, though you know it will fade back into the others before long. For a moment, your attention stays close, your palm on the table, your shoulders under the shawl, the iron curve of the chair at your back, the warmth of the terrace stones still rising unevenly through the soles of your shoes. Then, without effort, your gaze moves past the board and the glasses and the low murmur of the patio, out toward the rows of vines descending the hillside. The rows are still visible, but less sharply. The light has shifted while you were tasting. Gold has thinned to a cooler tone, and the green of the vineyard has begun to fold into blue. The rows are still there, still climbing and dipping with the shape of the land. Yet their edges no longer insist on themselves. They soften where they meet shadow. Distances become less exact. What was a bright leaf a little while ago is now only part of a darker band. And what was sun on packed earth between the rows has turned to a muted strip of gray-blue, then to something dimmer still. The heat in the stones beneath the table is less direct now. The air that touches the side of your face carries a cooler thread through it. Rosemary from the terracotta pots reaches you in brief, resinous breaths, and lavender follows with its drier, powdery note. Both scents sharpened a little by the drop in temperature. Your jaw unclenches without your meaning it to. The set of your shoulders loosens under the shawl. The light fades gradually. Somewhere behind you, farther along the terrace, someone shifts a chair, and the iron feet scrape once against stone, then stop. A fragment of conversation in Italian rises and falls. Another voice answers in English, low and amused. And then that too settles back into the general patio hush, where words lose their edges and become part of the evening's texture. You do not need to follow any of it. The human sounds remain near the table line, near the glasses and small plates, and the muted clink of ceramic. Beyond that, beyond the terrace wall and the potted herbs and the last occupied tables, the hillside is getting quieter. You can see it in the cypress line first. Along the edge of the vineyard, the trees have been darkening almost without notice. In the late sun, they held detail, deep green, feathered, textured where one branch met another. Now they gather into taller forms, more vertical than the vines, more solid than the olive-gray dusk around them. Their green remains for another little while, but it is no longer the green of afternoon. It has deepened toward ink. The cypresses read as silhouettes now. You rest your elbow near the tasting board and look between the stems of the glasses. The board itself, narrow and olive wood warm in tone, keeps its place at the center of the table. The first pour sits lower in its glass. The second and third remain untouched, darkening slightly as the light withdraws. Their colors become richer in the dimness, less transparent than they were when the board first arrived. There is no need yet to reach for the next one. A breeze moves through the vineyard. It does not come hard enough to disturb the glasses or lift the shawl from your shoulders. Only enough to travel across the slope in a visible passing stir. Leaves turn their paler undersides for an instant, then settle. The motion runs through one row, then another. A low, shifting pattern that crosses the hill and disappears. A moment later, it reaches the terrace itself. You feel it at your throat and along one forearm where the shawl has fallen open a little. It carries the scent of vines cooling after sun. A green smell touched by dust and earth. Then it is gone, leaving the air clearer behind it. Your hand slides over the chestnut grain again, almost absently, as if to mark the difference between what moves and what stays. The table is firm beneath your fingers. The chair gives you its familiar support through the lower back and shoulders. One heel rests against still warm stone, while the other foot has found a cooler patch in the seam between two slabs. That contrast is pleasing in its own plain way. Even your breathing seems to have found more room in it. Slower now, less held high in the chest. Down the slope, the roads between farms have grown hard to pick out. Earlier, you could trace a pale strip here and there where gravel caught the sun, or recognize the brief movement of a car in the distance. Now the roads are mostly inferred from the shape of the land and from memory of where they run. No engine carries up from below. No gate clangs. Even the dogs from one of the far properties, who barked once in the late afternoon and then thought better of it, have gone silent. The countryside has gone quiet. One by one, the sounds that belong to work and movement drop away. For a little while, the birds still hold the upper air. You hear one call from somewhere near the lower vines, a short, descending note, then another farther off. A dark shape crosses above the cypress line and is gone before you can follow it. After that, there is a pause broad enough to notice. Not silence exactly, more the space left when one set of sounds has thinned and another has not yet fully taken over. The first wine has left a trace of citrus and mineral on your tongue, but it is fainter now, absorbed into the larger evening. Your mouth remembers the coolness of the glass stem. Your shoulders remember the sun-stored heat in the chair's metal when you first sat down. The shawl, drawn a little closer earlier, now rests with more weight across the tops of your arms as the air continues to change. A server passes at the edge of your vision, moving between tables with the same unobtrusive rhythm as before. A glass catches a brief, dim flash in their hand and then is gone behind another shoulder. From somewhere near the wall comes the small contact of spoon against cup. Once, then again. It is enough to remind you that other people remain here too, each within their own ring of table and chair and evening air. Yet, the farther the light withdraws from the hills, the less the terrace feels separate from the land below it. The terrace sounds blend into the night. You look again toward the vines. The rows nearest the terrace still show themselves clearly enough, each leaf mass dark against the lighter strips of earth between. Farther down, the pattern loosens. The hill becomes bands of blue shadow and deeper blue shadow, with the cypresses marking the edge in near black strokes. Beyond them, the next ridge has already flattened into a single tone, and above that, the sky keeps one last reserve of color, pale and cool where the gold has drained away. The warmth coming off the stones has changed too. It no longer rises in broad waves from the whole terrace floor. Now it collects in patches where the sun struck longest, especially near the wall and around the bases of the terracotta pots. If you stretch 1 foot forward, you can feel that stored heat more clearly there. And when you draw it back beneath the table, the air around your ankle feels cooler by comparison. The rosemary nearest your table has warmed all day in its clay container. Now, as the pot gives back its heat, the herb smells stronger for a moment, almost peppery. Lavender beside it remains drier, with a faint, dusty sweetness that belongs as much to the terracotta as to the flowers themselves. You do not need to think ahead to the next pour yet. It is enough to sit between what has already been tasted and what still rests untouched on the board. The first glass stands as a small, bright beginning, no longer as cold as it was, no longer shining in the same way, but still present. The second and third keep their places beside it, dark shapes deepening as the terrace enters evening. This measured progression has its own ease. Nothing arrives quickly. Nothing asks to be decided at once. Another breath of air passes over the hill, lighter than the first. This time, you hear it before you feel it. A dry stirring through vine leaves, a brief brushing sound from the lavender heads, then the faintest movement at the edge of your shawl. The cypress line remains still by comparison, tall and dense enough to absorb rather than show the motion. Their outlines are almost complete now, each tree drawn against the sky with less and less interior detail. The sound is slight, but it reaches you like a hand at the threshold, carrying your attention a little farther out than sight alone had done. When you shift your hand, your fingertips catch in one of the table's shallow old rings, and for an instant, the groove guides them in a circle. It is a small sensation, one more familiar contour among many, but it returns you to the table after the wider gaze over the hills. Wood grain under your hand, then rows of vines beyond. The touch of the shawl at your neck, then the cooling air above the slope. A low voice nearby, then the larger hush outside the patio's edge. And now, at last, the spaces between the last bird sounds grow longer. The hillside settling into a broader hush that feels ready for the insects, though they have not yet fully begun. The first glass rests back on the board. The cypresses dark along the edge of the vines, and the blue shadow keeps spreading, row by row, down the hill. The slope holds in that pause before the insects fully take over. Chapter 6. the young Chianti, before the swirl. The first glass has gone still on the board, its chill no longer the center of your attention, though the damp ring it left on the chestnut remains under the fading light, a darkened circle among older, pale marks. Beside it, the second pour has been waiting there all along at the edge of your vision, deeper in color, less immediately bright, darker and quieter than the first. It seems more reserved than the first did, as if holding itself a little back. You do not reach for it at once. The evening has already taught you a slower order than that. You wait a moment before reaching for it. Your hand rests for a moment on the table instead, fingertips finding the faint ridges in the wood grain. The chestnut is dry where the air has touched it longest, and cooler where the moisture from the first glass has spread and thinned. Under your other hand, the arm of the wrought-iron chair curves in its familiar line, painted dark green, a little warmer on top where it kept the last of the day, cooler underneath where the metal has begun to answer to the air. When you settle back a fraction more fully, the chair gives that small, recognizable creak. Not sharp, not intrusive, only the brief sound of weight finding its place. The shawl has slid slightly toward one shoulder, and you draw it back without looking. The cloth passing over your collarbone and the back of your neck with a dry, brushed texture. The terrace stones underfoot still release a little heat through the soles of your shoes, though less than before. Around the edge of the patio, the rosemary and lavender in their terracotta pots have changed with the cooling hour. In the late warmth, they gave off a round, sun-thick scent. Now the rosemary smells greener, more resinous, and the lavender has sharpened into something cleaner, almost silver in the air. Conversation from the other tables reaches you in pieces, and then thins again. A phrase in Italian, a low answer in English, one brief laugh that rises and falls without carrying. Somewhere near the wall, a glass touches wood with a single, neat note. The cypresses at the edge have lost nearly all their green and stand in dark, vertical forms against the remaining blue. You look down again to the olive wood board. It is narrow, longer than it is wide, the grain moving in pale honey and brown curves beneath the stems. The host placed the 3 glasses with enough space between them that each keeps its own shape on the board, its own pocket of attention. The first, pale and bright, now partly emptied. The second, the young Chianti, clear ruby deepening toward garnet, where the bowl curves inward. The last, still untouched farther along, darker and waiting for later, not yet part of your thoughts. It feels different before you even taste it. When your fingers close around the stem, the glass is not cold in the same way the Vernaccia was. There is no bead of condensation, no immediate shock of cool against warm skin. Instead, there is simple glass, smooth and dry, the stem thin between your fingers, the bowl carrying a temperature closer to the evening itself. You raise it a little, not yet to drink, just enough to see the color against the dimming sky. The wine catches what light remains and holds it lower, red made denser by shadow. The first scent is more reserved than the white was, not absent, only quieter at the rim. You bring the bowl near and notice what comes without coaxing. A straightforward red fruit note, fresh rather than lush, and beneath it, something a little firmer, almost stony. It still feels tight. You tip the glass and take the first sip as it is. The taste arrives more directly than the scent did. Cherry comes first, bright and red without sweetness, followed by bright acidity that keeps the mouth alert and clear. There is a touch of tannin at the sides of your tongue and along the gums, fine and drying, not heavy, just enough to give shape. But the wine feels held together still, younger than the last one felt, more upright, less inclined to spread. It moves in a straighter, narrower line, as if keeping some of itself in reserve. You notice how different your mouth becomes around it. The first white cooled and widened. This one gathers the senses a little closer, brings definition back to the palate. You let the sip settle before swallowing. Even after it is gone, the taste remains in a tighter path than the Vernaccia did, with a faint earthy edge under the fruit. The glass pauses in your hand. You do not hurry to explain it further. This is enough for now. The first taste before air changes anything. The wine in its earlier shape, compact and not yet fully giving. When you set the glass down again, the base meets the olive wood with a smaller sound than you expect, almost padded by the grain beneath it. The board itself stays steady on the table. Your fingertips drift back to the chestnut edge, tracing the worn roundness where many hands have rested before yours. The old glass rings on the table catch what little light remains. Some nearly vanished, some still pale and distinct. Beside them, the newer, damp mark from the white has already begun to dry at the edges. You breathe in through your nose, and the air has shifted again. The warmth that touched your forearms earlier has drawn back. In its place is a cooler layer moving over the skin, enough to make the shawl feel useful rather than decorative. You tuck one side of it more firmly over your upper arm, then settle into the chair another inch. Again, the iron gives its familiar small complaint, and then is still. Far below, the farm road that was visible in the late sun is no longer visible at all, though you remember where it runs. No engines pass. No doors slam from the houses farther down the slope. The crickets have become more consistent now. No longer separate notes, but a spread of sound from the fields, thin and continuous. Once, from somewhere near the Cypress line, a bird gives a last short call, and then nothing follows it. You return to the glass. Again, you lift it by the stem. Again, you smell before you drink. The scent has shifted only slightly in the minute or two since the first sip, but even that is enough to notice. The fruit is a little clearer now, less tucked in. Still young, still direct, but beginning to show where it might go. You think of how many changes in an evening happen this way, not by any dramatic turn, but by exposure. You take a second sip, still without swirling. This one feels a touch broader, perhaps because your mouth already knows what to expect. The cherry note is easier to find, and there is a hint of something floral, not yet fully formed. A suggestion rather than a statement. The tannin still dries lightly at the edges, giving the wine its frame. It is not rounded yet, not generous in the way the final pour may be later. It has a younger posture. You can feel that in the way it finishes, with a clean line that does not blur. The taste leaves your mouth refreshed in a different manner than the white did. Not cool exactly, but reset. You understand why this comes second. This red feels more inward and structured than the white. Near the edge of the patio, someone shifts a chair. The scrape is brief against stone and then gone. A server crosses somewhere behind you, footsteps softened by distance, and a moment later, a muted ceramic note sounds from another table. None of it pulls at you. The terrace keeps all these sounds low and separate, with enough space around each for them to fade before the next arrives. You rest with the glass in your hand and look through the bowl toward the vineyard. The wine darkens the view where it passes through, turning the last blue of the hills toward plum and rust. The cypresses become almost black through it. Then you lower the glass, and the colors return to evening's own scale. It is a small change, but your mind follows it with interest, glad for something so slight. Your thumb and first finger shift on the stem, feeling the seam where the base joins it. The glass itself is very light, almost less felt than the wine inside it. The red moves only a little when you tilt it, a thin line climbing the bowl and slipping back. You are not ready to swirl yet. There is no need to hurry toward opening. You stay with that first impression. Another sip. This time, the acidity catches first, brightening the tongue before the fruit follows. Then the cherry returns, firmer now, and that faint, earthy note beneath it. You notice how the wine's youth shows not as roughness, but as definition. Each part still a little separate from the next, each one held in place. Not everything has to merge at once. Some things are clearer before they soften. You swallow and let your shoulders drop more fully. The shawl settles into the space between your neck and the chair back. The iron loops behind you press through the fabric in broad, familiar curves. The seat has given up much of its stored warmth by now, though not all. Enough remains that the difference between metal and air is still readable through your clothes. Your feet stay planted on the stone, heels heavy, toes at ease inside your shoes. The board remains before you, steady and unadorned. 3 pours, each modest, each leaving room around itself. The first nearly finished, the second becoming known, the third still untouched, dark at the edge of your vision. You like that nothing on the table is crowded. Bread and oil have not yet arrived. No extra plates, no folded menus, no clutter of utensils. Just wood, glass, and the marks left by time and use. You lean forward a fraction and bring the Chianti near once more, breathing in at the rim. The aroma has not opened fully, not yet, but you can feel the possibility gathering there. A little more fruit, a little more lift, something floral just beneath the surface, not hidden so much as compact. In another chapter of the evening, with one small turn of the wrist, it will become something else. For now, it remains in this earlier form, and you remain with it. The crickets continue from the darkening rows below. A breath of air passes over the terrace and touches the side of your face, cooler than before, carrying rosemary from the pots and the faint mineral scent of stone after heat. You take one more unhurried sip of the young red as it is, straight and clear in its first expression, and then lower the glass back to the board. The chair gives the slightest creak as you settle deeper into it, and the sound disappears into the patio hush. Chapter 7. Swirling the Chianti and noticing cherry and violet open. The chair gives the slightest creak as you settle deeper into it, and the sound disappears into the patio hush. Your hand remains around the stem of the second glass for a moment, without lifting it, feeling the difference before you even move. The first wine had been cooler. This one is nearer to the temperature of the evening itself, as though it has already been sitting in the same air that touches your face and the backs of your hands. The bowl is smooth and dry. The stem is slender and steady between your fingers. Beneath your other hand, the chestnut table keeps its faint ridges and worn, shallow rings. Those old, pale circles left by other glasses on other evenings. A pattern your fingertips can find without looking. You bring the glass closer again and notice how the color deepens when it passes in front of your shawl, then clears at the rim where the remaining light still reaches it. Ruby first, then a darker red toward the center. Not heavy, not opaque, only gathered. The wine sits still, darkly reflective. The aroma you found before the first sip is still there, but close and somewhat folded in on itself. A little tart fruit, a little earth, something direct and young about it. It does not give everything at once. You notice that without needing to solve it. This is enough. Just this first version of it, this earlier shape. Around you, the terrace keeps its low evening murmur. A phrase in Italian rises from one table and settles. From farther off, a few words in English drift by and blur into the general sound. Somewhere behind you, a chair leg moves over stone with a brief scrape, and then is still again. The rosemary in the terracotta pots has changed with the cooling air. Less sun-thick now, more resinous. And the lavender carries a drier edge than it did an hour ago. From beyond the terrace wall, the vineyard has become less a pattern of individual rows than a broad, darkening slope. And the cypresses along the edge stand more firmly now, their shapes no longer softened by gold. You lower the base of the glass toward the table, not to set it down, only to steady your hand. The chestnut wood meets your knuckles with a familiar firmness. Its grain runs beneath the pads of your fingers in fine, raised lines, enough to catch your skin if you move slowly. The olive wood board lies across from you, narrow and pale by comparison. The first glass set back upon it, the third untouched and darker still. Between them, this second pour has become the center of your attention because it changes if you let it. You give the glass a small swirl. The base traces a modest ring against the wood, not scraping, only gliding in a contained orbit, while the bowl tips and rights itself in a measured rhythm. Inside, the wine gathers and releases, climbs the inner curve, and slips back down. The surface that had been still becomes a revolving, dark red line. Then you stop. The wine settles in a few small inward ripples, and you lift the glass again. Before the bowl even reaches your nose, something has shifted. What had seemed close and a little reserved has opened outward. Cherry comes first, clearer now, not candy sweet, but fresh and red. The scent of fruit cut open rather than preserved. Beside it, or just behind it, something floral rises where before there had only been a suggestion. Violet, faint but distinct once found, cool in its own way, almost powdery at the edge, and then more alive as you stay with it. Your forearm rests lightly on the table as you inhale again. The grain beneath your skin keeps you grounded while the scent rises. Cherry, violet, a trace of something darker underneath. Perhaps a little dried leaf, perhaps the faintest line of spice. You do not need to decide. From another table comes a faint glass clink, clear and brief. It carries across the patio and then disappears into the air so completely that what remains afterward feels larger, not emptier, just more spread out. You stay with the glass near your face a moment longer. The chair supports you from behind, the looping iron back pressing lightly through the shawl between your shoulder blades. The seat has lost some of the day's warmth now, though not all of it. Through the soles of your sandals, the stone underfoot still gives off a little stored heat in patches, here and there, while the air above it has turned cooler against your ankles. You take a sip. This time the wine arrives already opened by air, and you can feel the difference as plainly as you smelled it. The first taste had been more straightforward, a line drawn quickly across the tongue. Now it broadens. Cherry again, but softer at the edges. A faint tartness keeps it from becoming heavy. The floral note does not taste exactly as it smelled, yet it changes the whole shape of the sip, lifting it somewhere near the back of the mouth, making room in it. The wine moves across your tongue and leaves behind not just flavor, but texture. A light grip, a little dryness that gathers at the gums and then eases. You hold the sip a moment before swallowing. Your jaw unclenches a touch. The space behind your eyes feels less occupied. You are not trying to empty your thoughts. They simply stop pressing forward with the same insistence. Attention has been given a narrower path. Stem, wrist, scent, sip, table, air. When you set the glass down, it meets the chestnut wood with a muted note. Not sharp, only enough to mark the contact. Beside the older pale rings and the fading damp mark left by the Vernaccia, this glass leaves no moisture, only its weight and the shape of its base for a moment under your hand. You keep your fingertips around the stem while it stands there. At the edge of your vision, the terrace host moves between tables with the same unobtrusive rhythm as before. A bottleneck catches the last of the remaining light and then dims again. A dish is lifted. A glass is placed somewhere beyond you. There is no interruption in it, no flourish. Only the practical grace of someone who knows how little sound is needed. The movement passes through the evening and leaves it much as it was. You look back toward the vineyard. The rows are harder to separate now. Their earlier geometry softened into bands of blue and charcoal. The Cypress line has gone nearly black against a sky that still holds color higher up, though near the hills, it has already begun to flatten into dusk. The farm roads beyond are no longer carrying the occasional daytime engine. Nothing crosses the distance. The first crickets are not yet a full chorus, but one starts, then another farther off, and the pattern begins to form. Your hand returns to the glass. Again, you give it that small, circular turn. The second swirl is easier. The bowl inclines. The wine rises and falls in a dark red ribbon. The movement is almost companionable now, the kind that settles itself into the wrist once learned. The table remains your steady point, the ridged wood under your resting hand, making the circle feel contained, measured, real. When you stop and breathe in, the cherry seems rounder, less bright at the edge, and the violet has come forward a little more. Not dramatically. Nothing in this evening changes dramatically. A little air, a little time, a little turning. The shawl shifts as you lean back, and then settles again over your shoulders and upper arms. At the base of your throat, the cloth has kept a trace of your own warmth. Cool air touches the skin just above it. You breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth, and the scent of the Chianti remains for a beat, even after the glass lowers. Cherry, violet, a faint, dry note like stems or leaves. The memory of the sip lingers at the sides of your tongue. Nearby, someone laughs once, low and brief, and then conversation resumes at a lesser volume. The terrace does not empty, but it spaces out. Sounds come singly now instead of in clusters. A spoon taps ceramic from somewhere inside. The crickets beyond the patio answer with their own more regular pattern. Lavender brushes the air when a thin breeze passes along the line of pots and over the terrace stones. And for a moment, the scent of rosemary follows. Greener, sharper, almost cool in itself. You lift the glass for another sip, smaller than the last. The opened aromas meet you first, and then the wine itself, more settled now, less reserved than when you first tasted it. You notice how the second sip after the swirl asks even less effort from you than the first. The wine has already changed. The hand that holds the stem no longer needs to think about balance. The wrist rests. The shoulders remain low. Even your feet seem to have found a more complete way of meeting the stone beneath them. When the sip is gone, you keep the empty mouthful of air that follows it for a moment, tasting what remains. A little fruit, a little dryness, something floral, almost gone before it can be fixed too firmly. You set the glass down once more and let your fingers drift from the stem to the table, tracing one of the pale old rings with the tip of your index finger. The circle is wider than the base of the glass, left by some larger bowl or some wetter evening, and your finger follows it halfway before leaving it for the grain. After the swirl, the wine opens. The difference is enough. You feel it in the scent, in the sip, in the way your attention settles more fully into what is right here. The chestnut wood under your hand, the looping iron at your back, the faint cooling of the air at your wrists, the darkening vineyard beyond the wall, another cricket beginning somewhere lower on the hillside. And so you remain for a while, with this second pour in its opened state, only returning now and then to the glass, to the small circle of the wrist, to the cherry and violet rising a little more clearly each time, while the terrace continues around you in low voices, passing service, and the deepening blue of evening. Chapter 8. Wrapping the shawl closer as the first crickets begin. You remain for a while with this second pour, returning now and then to the glass, to the small circle of the wrist, to the cherry and violet rising a little more clearly each time, while the terrace continues around you in low voices, passing service, and the deepening blue of evening. After a time, you feel the air cool on your forearms and neck. It is not sudden. The warmth has simply thinned enough for you to notice what is replacing it. You shift back into the wrought-iron chair. The chair has cooled. The metal under the painted dark green remains familiar beneath you, the looping backrest pressing in its known pattern between your shoulders. But the heat has begun to leave it by degrees. When you settle more fully, the chair answers with that small creak you already know, a brief note of iron and weight, then stillness again. Your hand returns to the chestnut table, almost without intention. The wood is cooler on the surface than it was earlier, though not cold, and the faint ridges of grain still offer the same steady resistance under your fingertips. The old rings and stains show in the dim light, and beside them, the newer marks from this evening have started to lose their sharp, wet edge. Your hand finds comfort in the worn places where many other hands have rested before withdrawing into the night. Beyond the terrace wall, the vineyard has changed from rows into bands. The rows have blurred into dark bands, a layering of slopes descending into blue. The cypresses at the edge stand more firmly now, less green than shape. Each one a tall, vertical cut against the last remaining color in the sky. You do not need to look at them for long. It is enough to know they are there, where they have been all evening, only darker now. The sounds alter in the same patient way. A bird calls once from somewhere lower on the hill, then once again from farther off. And after that, the pause behind it lengthens. The daylight birds grow fewer, each call more isolated than the last, until the spaces between them begin to fill with another kind of sound. At first, it is only a single cricket, easy to mistake for a small scrape or dry leaf movement. Then another answers from deeper in the rows. Then several more, not loud, only more continuous, taking up the spaces the birds have left behind. You listen without turning it into a task. The crickets gather themselves into the evening, the way the cooler air gathers at your throat. Their rhythm is finer than birdsong, less directional, spread across the hillside rather than perched in one visible place. It comes from stone edges, from grass gone dark, from the base of walls, from the long margins between the vines. Once you notice it, you can feel the hour more clearly. The day is no longer easing toward evening. It has crossed into it. The shawl slips a little where it had been resting loosely over one shoulder. You feel the edge of it slide down your upper arm, a small change in weight. Then the brief exposure of skin to open air. Your fingers lift to catch the fabric and draw it back, and the motion makes a quiet rustle near your ear. Cloth brushing cloth. You gather it closer across the front of your chest and around the backs of your arms. Not tightly, only enough to keep the warmth nearer. The weave has a faint texture against the side of your neck, soft but not smooth. And once it is in place, you leave your hand there for a moment, palm resting through the fabric at your collarbone. That small adjustment makes the cool air easier to ignore. The table remains the same. The glasses remain on the olive wood board. Other guests continue in low conversation. A phrase in Italian, a reply in English, a brief laugh from farther down the terrace that rises and is gone. Yet your attention gathers inward a little more. The shawl marks the difference between late day and nightfall more clearly than the sky does. You stop expecting any stored warmth to return. Under the table, the stone still gives up a little of the sun. Through the soles of your sandals, you can feel pockets of retained heat in the terrace floor, uneven from one slab to the next. One stone is nearly cool, another still faintly warm at the center, where the light had struck it longest. You move 1 foot half an inch and find that difference. The way your body notices before your mind names it. You lift the second glass again, more for its presence in your hand than for any need to taste immediately. The stem is no longer chilled as the first had been. It meets your fingers at almost the same temperature as the air, bowl carries a little of the room left in the wine, and your hand receives that as well. When you bring it near, the opened scent still offers cherry first, then the floral thread that had seemed folded away before the swirl. But even this has changed slightly. In the cooler air, the aromas seem sharper. A sip returns the wine to your mouth, with less brightness than before, and more shape. The fruit feels rounder than it did at first tasting. The structure less direct now that time and air have done their work. You do not search it for anything. You let it arrive, let it spread, let it pass. The swallow is followed by a breath, and in that breath, the night air enters again, cooler over the tongue than the wine had been, carrying a faint trace of rosemary from the terracotta pots along the terrace and the dry green scent of the vineyard below. When you set the glass down, the base meets the chestnut with a muted contact, and your fingers remain lightly around the stem 1 second longer before releasing it. The board beneath all 3 pours has darkened in the fading light, its olive grain less visible now, except where a nearby lamp from the terrace catches it for a moment. The untouched third glass stands farther down the board, deeper in color, still reserved for later. You notice it only briefly. A thread of air moves across the terrace and passes under the edge of the shawl. It touches the inside of your wrist, the place where your pulse sits close to the skin, then goes on. The rosemary leaves in one of the pots release a sharper scent as the air brushes them. Lavender follows after, drier, almost silvery in the cooling dusk. These fragrances no longer rise in the sun-thick way they did earlier. They come cleaner now, more defined, each one separate before blending again with stone and vine, and the faint mineral smell that arrives after heat leaves masonry. Somewhere behind you, a chair leg drags once over the terrace stones, then stops. A server passes with measured steps, and from another table comes the small sound of glass touching wood. No one speaks loudly enough to break the shape of the place. The hush of the patio has stretched wider as the sky darkens. Not because there are fewer people, though there may be, but because each sound travels farther before it dissolves. The crickets continue under it all, a fine, persistent layer beyond the human voices. You lean back and let your shoulders meet the iron loops of the chair. Through the shawl, you can still feel the structure beneath, the curved bars pressing in familiar lines along your back. Earlier, the metal had seemed to return the day's heat into you. Now it feels more neutral, neither warm nor cold, simply there, outlining your shape and supporting it. You sink a little lower in the seat. The chair gives the faintest answer, then steadies. The sky over the hills has narrowed into fewer colors. Gold has gone. What remains is blue deepening toward ink, with one pale band still caught above the far ridge. Against it, the cypress line has become almost black. The vine rows below are harder to separate now, except where the slope catches the last residue of light. You find that your eyes no longer need to distinguish every detail. The hillside is enough as mass and contour, as dark land under a cooling sky. Again, the shawl shifts, this time at the back, where one corner has slipped between your shoulder blades and the chair. You ease forward, free it, and draw it around yourself once more. The fabric makes that same low rustle, close to your ear, and then across your lap, before settling into place. Your forearms disappear beneath it. The shawl holds a little warmth close. By now, the crickets are constant. The birds have almost entirely withdrawn. One last note comes from the cypress edge, brief and high. Then nothing answers it. After that, the hillside belongs to the insects and to the occasional movement of air through leaves. You hear, too, the far-off ordinary life beyond the vineyard thinning out. No traffic on the farm road below, no machinery, no barking carried from a neighboring yard. Only distance settling into fewer separate sounds. Your breathing begins to match what surrounds you, without any effort to change it. The inhale takes in cooler air, touched by herbs and stone. The exhale leaves through slightly warmed lips. One hand rests under the shawl against your ribs, where you can feel the rise and fall through the fabric. The other remains on the table, fingertips along the chestnut grain. Between those 2 points, your own breath under your palm, the ridged wood under your fingers. You stay exactly where the evening has brought you. The second glass stands near your hand, no longer newly opened, simply present. The first rests nearly forgotten on the board, its earlier brightness now part of another hour. The third remains untouched, dark and patient in the dimness, to be met later beside bread and oil and pecorino. For now, there is only this turn in the air, this slight drawing in of the shawl, this recognition in your skin that the warmth of day has gone far enough that you can stop expecting it back. And so you sit a little deeper in the chair, while the terrace stones release what heat they have left, while the rosemary sharpens and the lavender cools, while the cypresses become pure silhouette and the crickets spread themselves across the vineyard in a steady, dry chorus. Your shoulders settle under the shawl. The glass waits near your fingers. Chapter 9. Bread, olive oil, and pecorino arrive with the final red. After a time, the second glass comes to rest again on the olive wood board, and your hand returns to the table. The chestnut under your fingertips has cooled since the first hour of evening. Its ridges are easier to feel now than to see. One pale ring from the Vernaccia has nearly dried to nothing. Another older mark lies farther in, and the board sits among them with its narrow grain running lengthwise. 3 glasses spaced in the same modest line as before. The first is nearly finished. The second carries a little more than memory. The third, darker than the others, has waited untouched. Around you, the terrace has changed by degrees, rather than all at once. Voices still move from table to table, but more space lies between them. A phrase in Italian rises and falls. A brief answer in English follows. Someone laughs from farther down the patio, not loudly, and then the sound thins into the crickets beyond the wall. Rosemary from the terracotta pots has become sharper in the cooler air, less sun-thick than before, and the lavender gives off that dry silver scent it keeps for evening. Under your sandals, the stone still carries a little of the day, though now it reaches you in patches rather than a broad, stored warmth. You notice the host before you hear anything at all, simply because movement enters the edge of your vision where the tables meet the darker line of the terrace. The rhythm is familiar now, with no flourish or interruption. You sit a little straighter. The board is adjusted first. Not much, only enough to make space. Then the final glass is lifted from the olive wood board and placed directly on the chestnut table, a little nearer to you, beside where the bread and oil will sit. The stem set so it can be taken without reaching. Beside it comes a small plate with thick slices of pane Toscano, pale and dry-faced where the knife has gone through, the crust browned and matte rather than glossy. A shallow dish of new olive oil is lowered near the bread, green gold even in this reduced light. And for a moment, its surface catches one last reflection from the western sky, a dim oblong of brightness trembling at the top before settling flat. Last of all, a few curls of shaved pecorino are placed beside the bread, their edges faintly crumbly, their color somewhere between ivory and straw. The host pauses, as before, just one breath after the plate and dish have touched the table. It gives the oil time to still. It gives the glass time to stop its minute vibration against the table. Then, the host steps away again, leaving behind no more than a muted ceramic note and the slight shift of air that follows a passing shoulder. Nothing needs to be done quickly. You let your eyes move over what has arrived. The final red is not dark in a heavy way, but rounded in color. A softened garnet, deeper at the center, and warmer where the rim catches what remains of the light. The bread has that plain, almost chalk-dry look pane Toscano always has before oil reaches it. And perhaps that is part of its comfort. The pecorino has been shaved thin enough to curl back on itself, but not so thin that it loses its grain. You can already imagine the faint crumble against your tongue. Your shawl slips a little at one shoulder when you lean in, and you draw it back with a small movement of your wrist before resting your forearm near the plate. The cloth has gathered more evening into it now. It sits differently than it did earlier, no longer just an afterthought against your neck, but a real layer, a little weight across your shoulders and upper arms. Beneath you, the wrought-iron chair gives that familiar creak as you settle back again, and the looping backrest presses lightly between your shoulder blades through the fabric. You reach first for the bread. The crust feels dry and firm, the inside more yielding but still dense, with none of the salt that might sharpen it. It leaves a pale dusting of crumb against your fingertips. You dip one corner into the oil, not deeply, just enough for the porous surface to darken and drink in the green shine. When you lift it, a thin line of oil gathers and then lets go back into the dish. The scent rises at once. Fresh cut grass, artichoke, the peppery edge that new oil carries before it softens into the mouth. Dry bread first, then the oil entering after it, filling the crumb and changing its shape on your tongue. The bread absorbs and gives back. The oil moves across it with that green, living bitterness that belongs to olives pressed not long ago, followed by a warmer roundness that stays behind. You chew slowly. The crust breaks with a little resistance, then yields. It is not elaborate, and because it is not elaborate, every part of it can be felt. When you take the final glass by the stem, it is neither cool like the Vernaccia, nor as direct as the younger Chianti had been before air opened it. The bowl is near the temperature of the evening itself. Your fingers feel the faint smoothness of the stem, the slight weight of the wine shifting when you lift it. You bring it first to your nose. There is red fruit, but softer now, less bright at the edges. Something rounded, almost dusky, sits beneath it. The scent is steady, softened cherry, a little dried plum, and a faint earthy note underneath. You take a sip. The red meets the bread and oil still on your palate and becomes fuller for it. Where the bread was dry, the wine fills in. Where the oil was green and peppered, the wine rounds the corners. Its tannin is present, but settled, enough to give shape without narrowing the mouth. You notice how naturally the pace of drinking changes with food beside it. Earlier pours drew your attention upward into aroma, into the shift between one note and another. This one turns you downward again, toward chewing, swallowing, resting the glass, taking another small piece of bread. A faint clink comes from another table where a fork meets a plate. Someone says grazie. A chair leg moves once over stone and then is still. Beyond the terrace wall, the crickets have grown steadier. No longer a first appearance, but the ground sound of the hillside now, spread through the vineyard rows where the leaves have gone dark. If a breeze passes through them, it does so lightly enough that you notice it more by the change in the rosemary than by any visible movement below. You try a shaving of Pecorino on its own. It bends once between your fingers and then breaks along a dry line. On your tongue, it is firmer than its curled shape suggested. First, faintly granular, then creamy as it warms. There is a mild sheep's milk sweetness at the center, and a salt that arrives later than expected. Tiny crumbs cling near the corner of your mouth, and you brush them away with the back of your finger before taking another sip of the red. This time, the wine seems softer still, as if the cheese has laid a smoother path for it. The fruit deepens. The edges recede. You do not need to name more than that. You tear another piece of bread, smaller this time. The crumb gives under your thumbs. A few fragments fall onto the plate and stay there in a crescent near the Pecorino shavings. You draw the bread through the oil instead of dipping it, and a green trail follows the movement before the surface levels again. For a moment, the oil reflects the terrace lamp nearest your table, a softer glow than the last daylight had been. And then, even that becomes less distinct as the dish turns a little under your hand. You eat more slowly once the bread and oil are on the table. You find yourself setting the piece down between bites, not because there is any reason to, but because the pauses have lengthened on their own. Your shoulders drop another fraction under the shawl. The chair receives your weight more fully now. One foot shifts against the stone, finding a warmer patch left in the terrace where the day held on a little longer. The table edge presses lightly beneath your wrist. The pecorino changes as you go on with it. The first shavings seemed dry at the edges. Now, with a little warmth from your fingers and mouth, they release more fragrance. Faint hay, warm milk, a nuttier depth underneath. You place one curl on a piece of bread slicked with oil and let the whole bite come together before following it with wine. Bread first, then the brief resistance of cheese, then the oil joining them. And after that, the red passing through with enough body to gather each part without weighing any of it down. It makes a complete shape in the mouth, but not a heavy one. You can feel why this belongs to the later hour, not because it is grander, but because it settles more broadly. Farther down the terrace, another table receives something by candle or lamp, and there is the subdued sound of plate on wood. Then nothing more. The host moves in and out of sight with the same unobtrusive measure as before, never hurrying, never pausing long enough to become part of anyone's evening, except at the instant of service. Here, at your table, what has been placed before you is enough. The plate, the dish, the cheese, the glass, the chestnut table beneath all of it. Your hand returning from time to time to the ridged grain. You do not think back over the earlier pours in any deliberate way, and yet they remain in the body as contrast. The cold bead of the first glass against your fingers, the brighter lift of that first sip, while gold still lay over the hills. The younger red that changed after the swirl, opening itself by degrees. And now, this final pour suits the food. The cypress line beyond the vineyard has nearly disappeared into the dark, except where the sky behind it keeps a little blue. Crickets continue in the rows. The farm roads out beyond the slope have gone fully quiet. Nearer at hand, the terrace remains inhabited, but sparse in sound. Each voice placed farther from the next than before. You dip one last corner of bread into the oil and watch it darken. You lift a final shaving of pecorino and feel it crumble faintly between finger and thumb. Then you take the glass again, the stem cool only where the air has touched it, and drink the red in another measured sip, while the last reflection in the dish of oil lowers and is gone. Chapter 10. Lingering over the softer final pour under darkening cypress. You keep the glass in your hand a little longer now before drinking. Earlier in the evening, each pour drew your attention in its own way. The chilled brightness of the first, the change that came with the swirl of the second. But this last red does not need the same close attention. It lands more softly, with less contrast between first taste and finish. Its shape in the bowl is darker than the sky beyond the terrace wall. And when you tip it slightly, a muted garnet glows at the rim before settling back into shadow. Your fingers rest around the stem, and the place where your thumb touches the base has grown familiar over the course of the evening. A small point of coolness and balance above the weathered chestnut wood. You take a sip and let it arrive. The wine is less intent on showing its edges than the Chianti was. It spreads across the tongue with a broader weight. Not heavy, not sharp, only more settled. It feels fully open already. A little fruit remains in it, dark and low. But what stays with you most is the ease of its movement from first taste to finish. You swallow, and the warmth of it continues for a moment, low in the throat, then fades into the cooler air. The shawl has slipped slightly toward one shoulder. You draw it back into place with your free hand, feeling the cloth pass over the back of your neck in a dry, familiar stroke. Beneath you, the wrought-iron chair gives the faintest creak as you shift your weight deeper into the seat. There is less sun left in the metal now. What warmth remains has narrowed to a trace along the seat and the curved bars at your back, while the terrace stones underfoot still release a little stored heat through the soles of your shoes, unevenly, from one patch to the next. On the table, the bread has lost some of its first freshness to the air and become a little firmer at the cut edge. The shallow dish of oil sits low and green in the dimness, no longer reflecting much beyond a dull sheen. A few curls of pecorino remain on the plate, their shaved edges beginning to soften and bend. The olive wood board still keeps the line of the evening before you. The pale first glass nearly empty, the second with only a little ruby left at the bottom, and the final red nearest your hand. A nearby table falls silent. You do not notice the exact moment speech stops, only the change after it has happened. A glass is set down somewhere farther off. A chair leg nudges stone with a short scrape, and then rests. The crickets beyond the wall come forward a little more clearly, not louder so much as less covered. Beyond the terrace, the cypress trees have gone almost entirely black. At first, they were distinct trunks and tapering crowns, then dark verticals against the fading hills. And now they are nearly one continuous shape along the vineyard's edge, cut cleanly against the blue that remains higher in the sky. You look toward them without needing to focus. The vine rows beneath have lost their separate lines. What was once pattern is now slope, and what was once distance is now tone. A dark rise of land, a darker seam of trees, a sky still carrying enough color to show where one ends and the next begins. You lift the glass again. The stem is smoother now where the warmth of your fingers has stayed with it. The bowl gives back a faint coolness where the air has touched the outer curve. When you bring the wine to your mouth, the scent rises first. Not pronounced, only settled, with something dark and mellow in it. Your fingertips, spread lightly against the chestnut, find the shallow ridges worn by years of use and the pale rings left by old glasses. One ring from earlier this evening remains just visible near the first pour. A lighter mark drawing into the wood. You drink less this time. How long the glass stays in your hand before you set it down has lengthened. The inhale comes in through the nose with the scent of lavender from the terracotta pots and the drier resin of rosemary. The exhale leaves warmer against the shawl near your collarbone. For a while, you do nothing but sit with the aftertaste. It rests at the back of the tongue and then recedes. The oil on the plate gives off its green scent when you tear another piece of bread and drag it once through the shallow pool, enough to darken the surface and leave a glistening edge. The bread is plain in the Tuscan way, unsalted, dry enough to carry the oil well. You eat it slowly, and the red that follows seems deeper beside it, its warmth lingering a little farther back in the mouth. A flake of pecorino breaks against your lower lip before it dissolves, faintly crumbly, with that dry, milky sharpness, turning gentler as it warms in your mouth. Higher up, the remaining blue has deepened toward ink, though not fully. Near the horizon, there is still a diluted band of color over the hills, enough to separate the land from the sky and the cypress from both. The farm roads beyond the vineyard stay empty and unseen, but you know where they run by the shape of the slopes and by the absence of any passing engine now. The crickets keep the rows company instead, their rhythm steady and fine-grained, spread wide across the hillside. A breeze moves once through the vines below. You hear it before you feel it, a dry passing stir along the leaves. Then a light touch reaches the terrace and cools the side of your face. It lifts one loose edge of the shawl and lays it down again. The rosemary in the pots gives off a sharper scent for a moment after the air passes through it. Then the leaves are still again. You set the glass down and leave your hand around it for a moment after it meets the table. The base touches wood with a low, contained note. Through the stem, you feel the slight transfer of pressure as it settles. Nothing trembles now. From farther across the patio comes a brief line of laughter, then only a murmur after it, the sound lowered almost at once. It does not carry far. The air takes it and thins it before it reaches you fully. Someone speaks close to the ground, perhaps bending over a bag or jacket. The words are too low to separate, and then they pass. Another pause opens. You take the final red again and turn it slightly, not to open it as you did with the Chianti, only to watch the surface gather and release along the bowl. In the dim light, the wine's color is less visible than its movement. A darker crescent rises and falls. The scent shifts only a little. The wine doesn't change much now. You do not need to search for cherry or violet, or compare chill against warmth, or follow the first bright line of citrus into mineral and salt. You only receive what is present now. A sip that settles low, a modest warmth, a finish that leaves the mouth clear. Your shoulders have lowered since the beginning of the evening. You feel it when you lean back, and the looping iron of the chair meets a broader part of your back than before. The shawl lies more evenly across your upper arms. The cypress line stays fixed at the edge of sight, nearly black now. And for a moment, the sky behind it appears lighter by contrast. A last reserve of blue thinning slowly above the hills. The vineyard itself is no longer visible in rows, only as a darkened slope below the terrace. The terrace feels small against the dark hillside. You reach for another shaving of Pecorino and find the plate nearly empty. The curl breaks as soon as you lift it, leaving a few crumbs against your fingertip. You taste the salt of the cheese, then drink. The red meets it with the same easy steadiness as before. Nothing in the glass surprises you now. Another table settles into silence. The host moves somewhere out of sight, marked only by a brief ceramic touch and the soft rhythm of steps on stone. No one approaches your table. Nothing new arrives. The final pour remains with you as it is. Enough in the glass to continue. Enough on the tongue to make the next sip unhurried. You lift it once more and pause before drinking. Looking out where the cypresses stand in their dark row at the edge of the hill, the rim of the glass catches a little of the remaining sky. Your fingers keep their place on the stem. Crickets carry on in the rows below, and from very far off comes one last thread of conversation. So faint, it is almost only cadence. Then that too recedes, and you drink again, slowly, while the blue above the cypress line deepens toward black, and the trees lose even their edge for a moment before the eye finds them again. Chapter 11. Resting with the glass in hand as the terrace grows quiet. Then that too recedes, and you drink again, slowly, while the blue above the cypress line deepens by another shade. After a while, the glass remains in your hand longer than it rises to your mouth. Your fingers rest around the stem without deciding anything, feeling the slight chill that still lives in the thinner part of the glass, and the faint warmth gathered in the bowl where your palm has been near it. The red inside has lowered by degrees. It no longer marks time in sips so much as in pauses, in the moments between one breath and the next, in the way your shoulders have settled farther down beneath the shawl than they were an hour ago. The chair receives that extra weight without protest. Only the familiar little creak from the dark green iron when you shift your hips a fraction deeper into the seat. Its looping back presses in the same places it has all evening, known now by your shoulders and spine so completely that you stop noticing the shape until you move. The chair has cooled, though you still remember its warmth. One hand leaves the glass and comes to rest on the chestnut table. The wood is cooler than before, though not cold. Your fingertips find the ridges in the grain without searching, following one raised line and then another, as if reading something too worn to need deciphering. Pale rings from old glasses overlap near the board, some broad and faded, some sharp at the edge. And among them sits the fresh mark from this evening's moisture, darker at first, then already beginning to blur into the wood. When you set the glass down, the base touches with a small, rounded note. A little crescent of condensation gathers almost at once and spreads outward, making a new ring beside the older ones. For a moment, it shines where the terrace light catches it. New moisture joining the pale ghosts already there, tonight laying its own brief claim on the weathered surface. Your thumb stays on the stem a second after you set it down. Beyond the table, the patio has thinned. A phrase in Italian lifts and falls. A few words in English drift from farther off, and then are gone into the open air. Someone laughs once, not sharply, but as though the sound has already softened before it reaches you. Ceramic touches wood somewhere behind you. A chair leg moves over stone with a brief scrape and stops. None of it gathers into a scene you need to follow. It stays at the edges, part of the terrace, the way the scent of rosemary has been part of it since you arrived. That rosemary is cooler now too, less sun-thick, more resin than warmth. And the lavender in the terracotta pots along the terrace edge gives back a drier note when the air shifts. The stone underfoot still keeps a little of the day. If you slide one sandal slightly and let the sole rest more fully, you can feel where the warmth lingers in patches and where the surface has already gone flat and cool. The change is uneven, as it has been all evening. One stone slower to release heat than the next. You lift the glass once more, but only enough to feel its weight return to your hand. The final red has become rounder as it sits. A breath of wine remains at the rim. The bread on the plate has firmed the crust and dried a little at the cut face. The oil lies low in its shallow dish, green dulled toward bronze in the dimmer light. A few pale curls of cheese have loosened into softer bends. You do not need to taste each thing again to keep them with you. The mouth remembers enough. The dry pull of the bread, the peppered green note of the oil, the faint grain of pecorino where it gave way at the edge, the red smoothing them all together afterward. A cool first brightness still lives somewhere at the back of the tongue from the opening white. Later, a darker fruit once widened with a single slow swirl. The olive wood board sits where it has sat all evening, its narrow length turned slightly across the chestnut table. In this light, the grain is less golden than before, darker and more matte. But your eye still catches the shape of the three glasses in their line. The first nearly empty, the second with only a little ruby left at the bottom, the third nearest your hand. The board has become another fixed surface among the others. As familiar now as the chair arm beneath your forearm, a breeze reaches the terrace and passes over the back of your hand. It is not enough to move anything more than the lightest edge of the shawl, but your skin notices at once. You pull the shawl closer. The fabric makes a dry, brief rustle near your collarbone. Then it is still again, lying with its light weight over your shoulders and upper arms. You notice you're breathing more clearly now. The inhale comes through the nose, with the scent of wine and wood and cooling herbs still faintly present. The exhale leaves warmer air across your upper lip. If you rest back fully, you can feel the breath move the shawl a little at the chest. A rise so slight it would not show to anyone else. The hand on the table remains where it is, palm down now, taking in the coolness of the chestnut through the skin. Farther out, beyond the terrace wall, the crickets have taken over completely. Earlier, they entered one by one between the last bird sounds. Now they make a steadier field. Not uniform exactly. One patch in the vines starts, another answers from lower on the slope, and a thinner thread comes from somewhere nearer the farm road. The road itself has gone silent. No engine carries up the hill. No gate sounds. The vineyard rows, which you could once follow line by line into the distance, are now only darker bands descending away from the terrace. The cypress line has become nearly one shape. The cypresses read as one dark line now. Above that black seam, the blue has deepened again. Not dramatic, just one shade after another, until the color feels denser. At some point, the host passes in the background. You do not turn at once. You notice first the measured footfall on stone, then the brief touch of glass against a tray, then the stillness after. By the time you glance up, the movement has already gone to the edge of your attention. A table farther away has emptied. Another remains occupied, but the conversation there has thinned to intervals so long that each sentence seems to arrive by itself. The service has never broken the calm here. It recedes now almost entirely into pattern and distance. You pick up the glass again because the hand wants something to rest around. The bowl is smoother than the wood, cooler than your skin, and the stem gives a cleaner line for the fingers than the wrought iron of the chair arm. Glass in hand, table under fingertips, chair beneath you, shawl at the shoulders, breath moving in and out. A final sip, or nearly final, meets you without the brightness of first tasting. The wine is softer now, more settled. It reaches the tongue and spreads with no need to search for notes. You swallow and keep the glass near your mouth for a moment after, catching the fading scent from the rim. Then you lower it once more and place it carefully on the chestnut. Another damp ring begins under the base, fresh and clear against the older pale circles. You trace near it with one fingertip, not through the moisture itself, only along the dry wood beside it. The grain rises under your skin in low ridges, worn smooth at the crest. There is comfort in how little the table asks of the hand beyond resting there. The same can be said of the chair, though you do not phrase it to yourself in words. You simply feel the iron at your back, the seat beneath your thighs, the slight give of your body as it yields to a posture it has returned to again and again over the course of the evening. A glass is set down somewhere to your left. Crickets fill in around it. A murmur from the remaining table rises for a few seconds, then drops. From the pots at the edge comes the dry green scent of rosemary after nightfall, and under it, the faint mineral warmth still leaving the stone. You sit with your hands around the glass, your feet on the terrace stones, one warmer patch under the left sole, a cooler one under the right. Crickets continue in the vines. Chapter 12. Breathing into the Tuscan night on the Vineyard Terrace. At some point by now, the tasting no longer structures your attention. Not suddenly, not with any announcement, but all at once, you can feel that the sequence has fallen away. No next pour to anticipate. No course to compare against the last. No need to keep the small order of hand to glass and glass to table. What remains on the board and table remains, but without asking to be followed. The three stems still stand in their line beneath the dim terrace light. Bread crust dries at the edge of the olive wood board. The dish of oil has gone darker green. The last pale curls of Pecorino soften into the wood. Yet none of it organizes the hour anymore. You remain where you are, inside that release. Your breath moves in and out through cooler air. The chair supports you in the same familiar places. Across the back, beneath the thighs, at the curve where your shoulders settle against the looping iron. The shawl has found its resting shape around you and no longer needs adjusting. Night has fully settled over the terrace. Earlier, there had still been color held in the stones and along the hill. Some remaining distinction between leaf and row and wall. Now, the vineyard below has become a broad, dark arrangement of slopes and lines, more felt than clearly seen. And the cypresses at the edge stand in one near black band, vertical and spare, against a sky that keeps a little blue high above the hills. Lower down, where the land folds away, the farm roads have gone completely quiet. No engine passes. No late bird cuts across the fading light. The crickets have taken over the spaces between all other sounds and filled them with their steady grain. Your hand rests on the chestnut table again, almost where it began hours ago. And the wood is cooler than it was at dusk. The ridges of grain still meet your fingertips in the same shallow rises, and the old pale rings remain under your palm. Some nearly gone, some clearer, with tonight's newer marks drying among them. You do not need to trace them now, though you could. It is enough to feel the slight unevenness beneath the pads of your fingers, the worn edge where many hands have leaned before yours, the faint drag of skin over wood when you shift even a little. By now, the table feels familiar under your hand. Around you, the patio hush has thinned, but not disappeared. A few voices remain at a distance, lower than before, shaped more by cadence than by words. Italian rises and falls from one side of the terrace, English from another, both softened by evening air and by the fact that no one is trying to be heard very far. Once, a glass touches wood with a small, dry note. Somewhere farther back, a chair leg moves against stone and then stops. The crickets continue beneath it all. The scent on the terrace has changed with the dark. Rosemary from the terracotta pots along the edge comes through first now, resinous and dry, more defined than it was in the warmth of late day. Lavender remains lower and cooler, less floral than before, almost silver in the mind, though the flowers themselves are hard to make out. From the table, there is still a trace of bread and olive oil, and from the glass nearest your hand, a faint red fruit warmth, rounded by time and air. Beneath all of it is stone, releasing the last stored heat so gradually that you notice it only where your sandals meet the terrace floor. One patch still warm, the next already cool. You breathe in, and the air reaches the back of the throat with that particular evening freshness that comes only after a hot day has fully let go. You breathe out, and your shoulders lower a fraction more into the chair. The iron gives its familiar little creak, not sharp, just the brief acknowledgement of weight settling deeper. That sound has accompanied you from the first moments on the terrace, and now it seems smaller, absorbed by the dark around it. Your spine meets the looping backrest. The shawl lies over the upper arms and across the chest with a light, even pressure. Enough to notice at the collarbones. Enough to keep the cooling air from becoming anything more than a contrast. The glass remains on the table for a while, without your hand reaching for it. There is no reason to hurry the last sip, and no reason to postpone it either. The last wine has softened. A little fruit, a little earth, a little warmth at the mouth of the glass. When your fingers finally close around the stem, the movement is small and unforced. The bowl is no longer cool. The base lifts from the wood with hardly a sound, and your wrist knows the measure of it. You take only a little. The wine rests on the tongue, round and settled, then slips away with less brightness than the first glass, less change than the second, more of an even curve. Afterward, you keep the glass in your hand for a moment before setting it back down. A faint ring gathers where it returns to the chestnut surface, darker at first, then already beginning to dull. Beside older circles and the half-dried marks of the evening, it joins the others without distinction. If you were to come back another day, you might not know which one had been made now. A few stars appear above the cypresses. Below them, the cypresses have become almost pure shape, a row of dark verticals with very little detail left in them. You can still tell where each tree rises, but not by leaf or branch, only by the clean difference between their narrow forms and the sky behind them. The vineyard rows are hidden, except where the slope catches a little remnant of light from the terrace and gives back a suggestion of order. You know the rows are there because they have been there all evening, because your gaze followed them while there was still gold on the hill, because the land keeps its form after sight has loosened. A final breeze passes over the terrace. It comes first across the forearms, where the skin has been exposed between cuff and shawl. Then, at the side of the neck, cooler than the air a few moments ago, the edge of the shawl stirs once against your cheek. Rosemary releases a sharper note. Somewhere below, leaves in the vines shift together with a dry, brief stirring, and one of the lavender stems taps lightly against its clay pot. The surface of the oil in its shallow dish catches the slightest tremor of reflected light, and then goes still again. The breeze moves on as simply as it arrived, and after it passes, the air settles into a steadier temperature. The jaw unclenched, the shoulders broad under the shawl, one hand on the table, one near the stem of the glass, feet planted on stone that has nearly given up its heat. The terrace host passes once more somewhere behind you, no longer serving this table, only moving through the remainder of the evening's tasks with the same unobtrusive rhythm as before. You hear the muted placement of something ceramic at another table, the pause that follows, the retreating steps over stone. No one interrupts your corner of the terrace. No one needs to. The board, the bread, the glasses, the dish, the last cheese curls remain where they are, and the scene keeps its arrangement without adjustment. A laugh rises briefly from far off, softer than laughter was earlier, and tapers into a few closing words. After that, one nearby table falls entirely silent. Not empty, perhaps, but still. The change is noticeable only because the crickets continue at the same pace, and the absence of voices leaves more room for their fine, continuous sound. Beyond the patio wall, the countryside has simplified into layers. Dark vines, darker trees, the long, low hill, the sky above it. The roads are invisible now. The houses, if there are lights in them, are hidden by the fold of land. What reaches you is only the night itself in its rural measure. Insects in the rows, a trace of dry herb from the pots, cooling stone and air touching skin. You sit with that for a while. The terrace continues in its reduced evening register. A low murmur from far away, crickets in the vines, the occasional movement of someone setting down a glass with care, the dark line of Cypress, the herbs in their pots, the chair beneath you, the table under your hand. The air after the breeze is almost still now, not fixed, just settled. It touches the face lightly, cooler at the tip of the nose, milder along the cheeks where the day's warmth has long since faded. The shawl keeps a little pocket of retained heat across your shoulders. Down at your feet, the stone has turned mostly cool. The one place near the chair leg still offers the last trace of stored sun. You stay seated with the iron at your back and the wood beneath your hand. Beyond the terrace, the cypresses are black and the crickets go on.